Welcome to the DDP podcast channel. We sincerely hope you will enjoy this episode. Don't forget to turn on your notification bell and to follow us right here on Spotify for more podcast episodes. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be joining us today. Thank you for listening into DDP podcast once again. It's very happy to have you back. Whether you're joining us on YouTube or on Spotify, we've got a very fun episode for you today. Joining me today is Cynthia Chigwenya, who is the CAS Program Coordinator and African Union Youth Ambassador. And we are speaking about the culture of democracy, not just necessarily in South Africa, but in Africa as a whole. And I think her views are going to be amazing in our conversation. But before we get into that, Cynthia, how are you? And thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Anna, for having me. Such a pleasure to finally get to engage with you. I think after months of following each other on LinkedIn. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. So let's just get right into it. What does democracy mean to you?
That's a tough one to start with. Democracy, I think that obviously there's from where the name comes from, which is Demos and Kratos, Demos meaning people and Kratos meaning power. So democracy would be then power by the people, but does that always translate to your everyday realities? Not necessarily. So I think for me, what would be at the center of democracy is defining that to laymen, or what is relatable, is actually a people-centered approach to development. That's what democracy is. That's what politics should be about. That's what elections should be centered on. But if the positions of power, people that really have, representatives that have the interests of people at heart. So that's what democracy is. And I'm very fortunate because quite often on platforms you hear people saying, it's an imported concept, it's a European concept. But really, if you look at African values such as Ubuntu, such as even in my culture, which is the Shona culture, when people greet each other, for instance, they say, which means I am well if you're okay. And that goes back again to what I was saying, that African culture on its own is actually very people-centered. It's centered around, our wellness, being connected. And that's what I think in terms of values, that's what democracy should stand for, and that's what it should be about. I think once we take that approach, we can't even discuss issues about accountability, because already we imbibe these values where we prioritize others so much so that we don't put personal gain or corruption, we prioritize the common good of other people in our society. So that's my interpretation of democracy.
No, I think it's a spot-on interpretation, because I think you've touched on the fact that it goes beyond elections. It's a lived experience. And I think you're also touching a little bit on the growing conversations right now around democracy and reimagining them within the African context. And for some reason, African leaders have gone so far out with it, imagining, if it's in the African context, it means there needs to be some authoritarianism attached to it, when what you just said now exactly about how African culture values people-centered, culture, and just the fact that I don't exist if you're not existing. If you're not okay, I'm not okay. And when you think about like the values of democracy, particularly the ones that talk about the importance of having transparency, right? And values that are speaking about the protection of human rights. Those things have to be people-centered, whether we like it or not. And so then I just want to get then into this growing conversation right now that democracy is failing. I'm of the belief that it's not. I just think that there's been a warped understanding of what democratic values are, and they fall short in terms of democratic processes, right? And that's where the dissatisfaction actually is. But there's this growing distrust in government, and the system in general is at an all-time high, like just people not trusting the government. And politics seemingly is moving towards more polarization instead of unity. And complex problems are being treated with the most simple solutions, giving rise to issues of populism, right? Do you believe that democracy is failing? Yes or no? And perhaps what do you think your solutions to it could be?
Okay. I like the last part, which is about solutions. I'll try and figure that out in about 20 or so minutes. Again, what you touched on was the overall context, which is polarization, is interesting, especially in the context of I think there was a launch by the International Economic Institute last year of their Global Peace Index last Friday. And what they actually noted was that there's an internationalization of conflict, which means we're even becoming further polarized. And that's a concern for not just democracy, but development and also just, the well-being or security of citizens within our various countries, and mostly because of political alignment or political reasons. So that's concerning. Do I think that there is a democratic recession or democracy backsliding? I think it's fair to be frank acknowledgement that we see the trends. We speak about the unconstitutional changes of government in several West African countries. We see here in the South African context the protests that people have engaged on for decades on end. I think there's an article by one of the professors at the University of Johannesburg that actually South Africa the protest nation. And in as much as those are forms of expression, they actually reflect to us that people are increasingly preferring to participate in informal spaces rather than going for the ballot, so that you go to the street and protest. And it's not just a South African phenomenon. We speak in Algeria, the protest against President Bouteflika. In Tunisia, we speak about the Yasmin Revolution, Nigeria, and in the European context, Fridays for Future. So really, I think we see this shift from the formal spaces where we traditionally thought this is where democracy is exercised, such as going to parliament, such as balloting, voting, elections, and shifting to the alternatives. But also even on the global context in terms of international development or international politics, we also see, I think, more and more calls for our institutions, such as the United Nations, to be more representative, even to extent where, several African leaders and heads of state have spoken against our institutions, IMF, United Nations. And again, these are institutions we traditionally thought that they seek to guide or mold what international politics or international development is. So I think there is that concerning trend, but I share similar sentiments with you when you say, you still believe in democracy, you think it's something that could work. I share similar sentiments. I don't think autocracy is an answer either. And up until we have an alternative to international development, to these international structures, we actually have to work democracy, because we don't have a sort of an alternative for now, and I don't think other forms of regime give more results or better results than a democratic institution does. And I recently completed a training with Africa Center for Strategic Studies, and one of the professors there said something. He said, in light of the unconstitutional changes of government, military regimes do not serve the best interests of the people, even those in the military. And I found that very profound, because sometimes we think of them as a response, but we then see cases such as Sudan, where the military then comes to power and then they take over power, and then within years after Omar al-Bashir steps down, we have a civil war. And again, people are at their lives at risk. So I don't think military regimes serve not even those that are in the military themselves.
I think
so. Yes, I think there's one part that in this thing, but I'll let you respond, and then I'll move to the solution.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak about like the military solution, right? Oftentimes the military solution usually comes out of a need for some revolution to happen against a particular dictatorship. And so people attempt to use the military to mobilize because it has the weapons, it has the artillery, it has the power to make it happen. And I'm just thinking now, it's such a random example, not necessarily with like politics here in Africa and the world as a whole with military stuff, but the principle I think remains the same. In the anime Attack on Titan, there's a little bit of a betrayal that happens where the people entrust the military corps to protect them. And things come up that, listen, these people actually don't have your mind and interest, right? And it brings out like conversations of, well, then should we be letting those who quote unquote liberate us end up ruling us? Which has been the effect of a lot of the leadership in African countries, where you have these prominent leaders who were revolutionaries during the time that the countries were colonized. And yet, when they got into power, it's almost as if the people-centered mindset completely left their minds, right? And it's a scary, situation, because it's like, well, but now you led us into this moment. And it's exactly what Sudan is going through. You led us to this moment, and now all of a sudden you're saying we can't get that democracy side of things. We can't be recognized as people. That's just the one thing I wanted to add to the conversation. But I think you were heading towards the solution side of things.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that input. And I think coming from, I was just a little bit of my background of race in Zimbabwe, which is, an interesting thing in terms of its politics. And the country's politics is really centered around, independence and liberation ideologies, almost to such an extent that if you do not fight in the liberation war, it's difficult to make a case to have a significant position within the government. And yet it's nearly 40 years since that war was fought. So if I want to run for politics and I just fight in the war, well, I wasn't born then. So it's interesting that you say that. In different cases, we've seen cases of Ghana, where Ramadan goes and has a one-party state. So it's an interesting question around liberators and their governance capacity. Their role just to liberate and then hand the baton to other people that will ensure a country's economic development. And there's one very famous professor, he's Pan-Africanist and speaks so much, and he's got one of his favorite things that he says, no matter how good a dancer you are, you should know when to leave the stage. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have when people get into positions of power, then they do not want to let go. That becomes their like president for life, or it's not people leading organizations for 30+ years. And that limits the institution's capacity to reinvent itself and become fit for purpose, because leadership hasn't changed much. So I think 3 responses to how to enhance democracy and talk to the solutions, some of the challenges we're having. And at the center of it is an informed electorate. Citizens are critical. And I say this because I'm affiliated with the Union, and every time when I get into the country or I get into a conversation, people will pick to say, okay, the AU didn't disappear here, or they didn't come to our country when they were human rights violations. Actually, that is not the role of the African Union as an institution, because it's an institution that is presidents or heads of state or countries. So the leadership that is at the country level is very much reflected at the regional level. So if you as an electorate or citizens are not playing your part in electing members that are competent, that represent you, that have your interests at heart, then that's what you have been at the international level. You have those same people. So it's almost as though asking an institution represented by the very people you complain about to come and interfere. So I think having an informed electorate is critical, even more critical than most of the institutions can interfere in national politics. So citizens must participate in elections. Citizens must elect people who are competent. Citizens must be informed and appropriate to citizens, I also believe that we need to have institutions. That are inclusive. We need to have institutions that are fit for purpose. We need to have institutions that are relevant. And a part of doing that or achieving that is actually reevaluating and reassessing, saying, okay, when we formed this political party, for instance, that was based on attaining democracy for South Africans in 1994, but years later, this is 2023, are we still speaking to the needs of the people? So that continuous reflection and introspection of the institutions, what their purposes are, and do they continue to still serve the people? I think that is critical. So in addition to informed electorate, I think fit for purpose institutions are necessary, and your Chapter 9 institutions come in here to ensure accountability. These are part of the institutions that we speak of. And then finally, coordination and coherence. Because in as much as we say, okay, the responsibility of the citizens, it's responsibility of the institutions, I also think that the international sphere has got a role to play in influencing and promoting good practices. So that coherence within your African Union as an institution, the United Nations, international organizations, the regional organizations, that is SADC, is really important. For instance, that there's human rights violations in Eswatini. Those institutions must speak up and doesn't take precedence, so that when it happens in Lesotho, Zimbabwe, or Zambia, it doesn't then just become the norm. So I think those three components are really critical in terms of enhancing democracy. The citizens first, they have the sole responsibility, the institutions to protect and promote the progress that has been made, and regional organizations to support the progress that has been made at the national level. Yeah, I think you're okay.
I'm back. Just to go back to the citizen responsibility and the informed electorate and the importance of it. I think it's common knowledge at this point that, when we think about Africa's electorate, it's growing more and more every single day to becoming a youth electorate. And the opportunity to be informed and to have those opportunities to be in the formal spaces as youth, to be able to have your voice heard, it seems to be shrinking. And on top of that, there's almost also this roadblock that young people have come to of believing that, fine, okay, my responsibility as an African citizen is to hold these leaders accountable. But my informal means of holding them accountable, when we think about protests and mobilization on the ground, is often pushed forward by young people. That's not being recognized. Secondly, the people that I see on the ballot don't reflect me. So why would I go ahead and vote for those people who ultimately would be, on the national level, to the regional, to an African Union level? There's that conundrum and frustration that a lot of young people are currently facing. And I was at an event last week with Youth Lab, and we all kind of were just like stuck in the room, and we were like, we know the frustrations of the young people, but honest to God, we don't even know where to start with this. And the IEC rep that was with us on the panel was just like, well, then just start your own political party. Just run for president. Just do it. And yet the frustration is it's not that easy. It's not that simple. It seems simple in terms of like constitutions and charters, etc., that truly, if I'm not happy with the people on my ballot, then I should be the one to go for it. But the system is already so unfair. So I think the question I want to get to here is, how do we get to a point where we can let and allow for young people to infiltrate these formal spaces on the political scale, not just necessarily for representation purposes, but giving them the opportunity to play the game. There's almost this hesitancy of wanting to play the game, not wanting to learn the rules of it because it's too much. But that's the way to enter, right? So how do we mobilize young people into considering playing that game?
Sure. That's a good reflection when you say that representation, but not only, I need to put this back, but not only, representation for the sake of feeling quotas and saying people represented, but actually meaningful engagement when it comes to politics and when it comes to decision making. I would agree with the panelist speaker that we had who said actually need to get into politics. I agree with that, challenging as it may be. I'll give an example. Well, there's the thing, I'm not too sure who said this, but that person specifically said the essence of leadership is sacrifice. Imagine pre-1994 if the leaders like Biko or Nelson Mandela said, oh, we actually don't even know if South Africa is going to get its democracy, so why should we try? Would we have the reality we have today? Maybe we would have had it in 1994. No, because the people that would have pushed it have said, we actually, the space is not representative of Black people. The space is not representative of, of Africans. So there are so many challenges to push against the apartheid government. So we're not going to push. We can't. We won't be able to make effectual change if we. I think the challenges are more than our passion and our interest into making the space reflective. Responses to that is how do we make a formal space inclusive of young people and have them work in terms of meaningful participation. First things first is we need to work together. Many times you find one group there, one group there. I think if we bring our initiatives together and actually find a way to coordinate and collaborate, that will have an impact. There are cases where young people have gotten together and lobbied. I'll just take example once again of Nigeria with the Not Too Young to Run campaign, because youth across that country united and said, actually, this legislation is unfair. We're going to run and lobby against it. The Nigerian legislature actually reduced the number of years that are required to run for political office, allow more and more young people to come in. But if we're like lobby, right, to have that attention of.
Sorry, Cynthia, I lost your audio for a second over there. You cut off when you're talking about the lobbying for young people in the formal spaces. If you could just repeat that, please.
So one thing with together, and for example, of Nigeria's MPhil.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I think I'm losing your audio completely now. Right. So just to go back to the lobbying process and movement towards having young people in formal spaces, can you just give us maybe a bit of a breakdown on how we can start taking the steps to getting there? I think the first one that you had mentioned was just the mindset shift that needs to occur, psychological change and drive that needs to occur, that if you want power, you have to take it back. And case in point, your Steve Biko, your Nelson Mandela, Chris Hani, and so on and so forth. Fine. Now I have that mindset. Now, how do I move forward from there?
Thanks again, Yanga. And yes, I think a mindset shift is necessary, not only for the young people themselves, but even for those that are actually in positions of power, to realize. I always make an argument that it's not enough to say we should include young people because they're young people. We should include young people because they are 30% or 50% of the population, or in countries like the Gambia, you hear about youth making 60% of the population. It's a great argument, yes, but it's very limiting because it leads again to, you know, issues that we're seeing around quota, fulfilling an expectation, and it actually leads to a policy panic because you're just responding to this, increase in terms of the demographics. But if we actually have a mindset shift and we actually look into skills, what capacities do these people or this demographic have, their tech savviness, their innovativeness, how do we bring that into resolving development challenges such as radicalization? And these are things that our governments are failing to address. Violent extremisms, recruitments on the internet, these are things that our governments are challenged at addressing. But if we speak then to young people that are either in IT coming in to help and address that, it changes the mindset from, just people that are part of a big population to people that are actually contributing to responding to challenges and threats that our states are facing. And then in terms of, I think, ensuring that we actually participate in politics, the first is coordination and coming together. We need to collaborate and not operate in silos. That's critical. If you're mobilizing, you need to have the masses. So I think working together is the first part, understanding the system. One person said, gone are the days where, activism should just be about making noise. You actually need to be strategic. In some cases, it makes noise to protest and go in the street. But in some cases, it makes sense to sit in the meetings that, these very people we want to be included by are sitting in and listening and learning from them. So that aspect of intergenerational dialogue, intergenerational leadership, intergenerational engagement, where you don't come in with an approach that says, we know the government is failing. We know the government is not doing this. We know you're not doing that. Is that correct? Yes. Is that strategic? No. Because the moment you come in saying that, they're not going to listen to you. But the moment you come in to say, actually, I think I could learn one or two things, the next time you as a young person suggest this to that person who's in the position of power, they're willing to learn from you. Why? Because you've built a relationship. You have worked with them. Challenge to the system is you have tried to understand the system. So that's one of the things that could work beyond protesting and participating in alternative methods. Third method is to leverage on on dynamics within the international development space. Different organizations, USAID, CAS, different international organizations actually coming up to say, okay, we have programs for young people, we've got funding for young people. Make sure that as an organization you're organized enough to get that funding, to engage with those international organizations. And why do I say that? Governments don't operate in silos. So if at the international level, there are increasing calls for inclusion of young people, chances are, our governments will also try to do some rebranding. In the past years, we've seen a number of young people taking positions of power, either even within your traditional political parties such as the ANC. You find a young person getting a position to be in power, and that's to respond to international pressure. So I think leveraging on those caveats or opportunities that come up within the international space, I think that's also one of the ways through which young people could better coordinate and make use of the opportunities that are there to leverage and advance their cause when it comes to their inclusion in politics and government.
Well, I think our time is running out, but this conversation truly could keep on going for such a long time, because now I just want to delve into, okay, fine, now tell me about those networking opportunities and how we get into that as young people. How does even an organization of a small group of my activists, how do I formalize them and how do we move forward from there? Plenty of other questions. What role as young women specifically do I have to be able to enter and have that level of agency, considering the amount of unfair advantages ahead of me, all the way to how do young people who are in queer spaces enter into these conversations, and especially if they're entering into these conversations with people who perhaps don't even respect them by virtue of their identity to begin with. But we don't have time, so I have to end this here. Perhaps another time when schedules align and we're good again, we can maybe make this a part 2 episode where we can maybe delve exactly into those nitty-gritties. But Cynthia, I should be letting you go, and I also need to be let go. But just before I let you go, maybe just some final thoughts and parting words of wisdom for our listeners and our viewers.
Great. Thank you so much again, Yanga, for having me. It's been such a pleasure, and so much to want to expand and engage further on, particularly the role of women. I think that's critical, especially with August celebrating our National Women's Day. It's important to reflect on women's role in leadership, which is not always appreciated or always underappreciated. So hopefully we'll get to engage on that. My parting words of wisdom would be mobilize. There is power in numbers. At the core of democracy itself, or as representative democracy, is actually numbers. For you to win an election, you need numbers. For you to make a case, you need numbers. So mobilize. And there's a proverb I heard recently, which I've been very excited to share, which says, he or she who thinks that they are leading, but they have no followers, are merely taking a walk. So mobilize, have people that join the cause, that will be effective. And then I think to wrap off, it is to say that development, peace and security, human rights should be everybody's business. Don't think that if you're in the private sector, it doesn't affect you, because you actually need a stable environment in order to operate and for your business to be effective. So peace and security, development should be everybody's business. And I'll close off with a quote by the former Secretary General Kofi Annan, who says, the causes of development, security, and human rights must be pursued together, otherwise none will succeed. So again, that interconnectedness, not just of us as a people, as humanity, but also even the components of some of our development aspirations, such as economic development. Without peace, some of the progress we've made, the buildings, the infrastructure, can be destroyed. So I think, again, that interconnectedness and reinforcing the values of Ubuntu and a people-centered approach, even at the smallest level in our organizations, it starts there. It's not going to start at a grand scale. It starts with the smaller issues, accountability to each other as human beings. So that's quite a lot, but we'll leave it there, and hopefully we'll get to engage again next time.
Yes, we will leave it there. I will hold you to that. And I know our audience will also hold you to that, to bring you right here so we can expand exactly on that conversation. Cynthia, thank you so much for joining us today. I really, really, really do appreciate it. I cannot wait to expand on the conversation and make plans regarding that. To our listeners and our viewers, thank you so much for joining us and making it through all the way to this part of the episode. We really do appreciate it. And until next time, thank you.
Well, we really hope you enjoyed this episode. Check out our social media pages at DDP_democracy to engage with more of our content, or you can head on over to our website at ddp.org.za to keep up with any events that we might have planned for you. Thank you once again for joining us.